Welcome to the Daily Commercial Forum. I'm your host, Sandy Moore. We have a responsibility to ensure the safety of our children and to prevent abuse. Today we will find out what happens when child abuse is suspected and what we can do to help. Our guests are Nicole Paulsini Mason, Development and Communications Coordinator for Kids Central, Joelle Aboitis, Circuit 5 Communications Development Administrator for the Department of Children and Families, Detective Amber Warren with the Lake County Sheriff's Office, and Lynn Sennett, recruiter for the Guardian Ad Litem program. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
I want to start out by just getting an idea, a definition of what abuse is. Joelle, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. And if I start going into too many legal terms, please pull me back.
I will do that.
Abuse is any willful or threatened act towards a child that causes or is likely to cause physical, mental, or emotional harm to a child. It can be excessive corporal discipline, for example, where the child is left with bruises and marks. It could be severe emotional trauma to a child who is already mentally fragile. There are many different types of abuse, and harm has a long definition in the statutes, including substance misuse, that leaves a child vulnerable to neglect or inadequate supervision. So there's a gamut of abuse indicators.
So what would be some things to look for as far as in looking for signs of abuse? And you can start and you all can jump right in.
Well, the easy things in looking for abuse is physical injuries. I mean, and why is that? Because you can see it. Children with bruises in places that normally they shouldn't have them there. For instance, if you see marks on a child's neck or on the face, I mean, those are pretty good cause for alarm because it can result in such serious injury. Even some spankings, I mean, it's harder to see that because even with kids in school or whatnot, you don't normally see their buttocks exposed.
Right.
But the physical is the easiest one to see. What's hard to record is the neglect because there's so many factors that go into that, and I don't want to hog this, so I'll let anybody else chime in here.
In schools, if you see a child that's wearing the same clothes, the clothes are dirty, you can tell that they're unkempt, maybe they're very, very tired, they may be hungry, things like that. Or maybe they're not even showing up at school, too, is another thing.
If they have to sit down, like trouble sitting, maybe they have a bruised butt, or if you put your hand on their shoulder and they're like, ow.
Wince.
Yeah.
You can always look for behavioral changes or strong emotions are also going to be symbols of abuse or neglect.
And what should you do if you think that if you think maybe someone is being abused?
Any person that believes a child is being abused, suspected, or has reason belief to believe the child is being abused should contact the Department of Children and Families and make a report to the hotline. We have several different ways that you can do that. You can do that by phone. You can call 1-800-96-ABUSE, and the numbers I always have to look at because it's 1-800-962-2873. We also accept reports by fax and by TDD and web reporting. So there's various ways, and there's sometimes a misconception that you have to make multiple reports of the same incident. You don't. Just make a good first one.
So if you have a suspicion that someone's being abused, then you can call them. Obviously, if you're witnessing abuse, 911 is probably what you want to call right then.
Emergency.
Yes, right then. But but if you just kind of have a suspicion, possibly. Now, I'm thinking to myself, if I have a suspicion and I really can't prove it, I don't want to get somebody in trouble that isn't really doing anything. What is the protocol? I mean, do they automatically go in and, what do you do? Once you get that report, what is it that you all do?
After the report comes in through the hotline, it's their job to determine if that is a report that, you should be investigated. They send out investigators, and that's their whole job, is to determine if there really is abuse or neglect. So the person who's making the call doesn't need to worry about getting someone in trouble, should be worried about that child in case there is trouble, so that the investigators can really go out and find out what's actually happening.
That's correct. And even when we go out and investigate cases, it doesn't mean we automatically take children out of the home. And I'll often hear criticism. We'll get an intake, and the abuse report may sound so horrible. However, when you get out to the home, it's not exactly as it read in the report. And our goal is not to just tear families apart, to take children out of homes. We really want to work with families. We are working really hard these days to engage with families and help them create safety plans for their own family. That's not our intent, is to remove every child.
The intent is to strengthen the family that's already there and maintain those children in a safe environment. And obviously at times that's not possible, so that's when the child is removed. It's a last resort, and people shouldn't be scared that that child is going to go instantly into foster care and be up for adoption. The child, we're going to look for family members to take care of the child. We're going to look for people who know that child to take care of them. If there's none of those people available who are adequate, then it goes to a foster parent. But the family still has time to, receive services, strengthen themselves, and really work towards getting the family back together.
Well, and I know, Lynn, you mentioned one of the signs being if someone's wearing the same clothes, if they're dirty, those kind of things. Being poor isn't necessarily it's not an abuse to your child. So, but you all can go in those kind of situations and help them to maybe receive services or things like that. Is that
right? Yes, there's people who are experiencing adverse conditions, and it's not their fault, or maybe they need a little bit of help finding employment. The department, along with Kid Central, has diversion services that they are able to get in there, strengthen the family, and get out with as little disruption as possible.
Why do you think that people don't report abuse?
Well, some people think, they're going to find out who reported it, and so they're really fearful. And the statute is very clear that reporter information is not given out. Even in court, when we're approached with that, if a judge was to say, well, you need to tell me who the reporter is, we're supposed to say, wait, Your Honor. And judges, typically, they will never do that. So it's a crime to actually disclose reporter information unless exempted by the statute.
Now, can you anonymously report abuse?
You can. There are individuals that are mandated to provide their contact information, and those individuals are typically the nurses, doctors, teachers, social workers.
Right.
But you are also allowed to make anonymous reports. General public can do that.
If you're concerned about being found out that you reported the abuse, you just need to be strategic in the way that you represent it. So if you're a neighbor, don't say, I'm their neighbor, and I saw my neighbor, hit their child. It needs to be a little bit more anonymous, but providing the information without giving away who you are, if that's your concern. But providing your information allows that protective investigator the opportunity to follow up and ask more questions. So there is positives with providing your contact information. Another thought of why people don't report is probably because they're afraid that the families are going to be broken up and that child's just going to be taken right out. And that's not, what happens. That's a last resort, as we said earlier.
Well, and I think other people, you have that sense of goodness, and you don't want to believe that something bad is really happening or that somebody is really hurting a child. It's hard to fathom, I think, for a lot of folks. But I'm going to tell you, I've seen a terrible death case where we've had a number of opportunities to have for general public people to intervene because of such serious bruises on this child, and they didn't. And that child is dead.
Now, is there a legal obligation for people to, if you know that there's abuse and you don't tell, is it legal? Is it illegal to not report it?
There is a statute in Chapter 39 that says willfully not reporting when you have good cause to believe. So There's a lot of gray area in that. And I don't want to also give you the impression that if you see a bruise on the kid's face that you need to call in a report.
I have
It
kids,
doesn't-
I know that it doesn't, sometimes it's just, it just happens.
You know, my child fell on the stairs and I was scared.
Yes.
But things happen. But people can be diligent and say, hey, what happened?
Right.
Or, take those little steps to ask questions. Ask the parent, if you're a teacher, hey, what happened here? And if things aren't adding up, then be concerned.
Right. What is the process once I know we mentioned a little bit that you have someone that comes out to the family, but once you have maybe assessed that there is abuse there, what's the process at that point?
After abuse is determined, or some level, if there's a concern, we call it a case and they take paths, and there's diversion, where we get services into the home quickly, maintain, strengthen the family, and back out. If they find abuse and it's court ordered, they can have services in the home at a longer period of time. So we stay involved to actually monitor the case and make sure that everyone is healthy and they're following through. And then also the other thing that could happen is the child would be removed, and it's called out-of-home services. So not only are we working with the parents themselves, but we're working with the children out of the home, possibly with a relative or another placement. So those are the three things that can happen after the abuse call. And sometimes the court is involved and sometimes they're not. There's different avenues that can be taken.
Can you give me an example of a situation where you go in and you've determined that there's some type of abuse, and maybe you can even explain what that might be, that where you leave the child there but you bring in some services?
So a lot of the abuse and neglect going on right now is mental health issues and substance abuse, and also with some family violence. And if there hasn't been a long history of any three of those, and they're usually combined, then we may give the family a chance and let them strengthen themselves. Especially with mental health issues, that could just be they need to get back on their meds, and maybe the kids need some counseling for what was going on with mom. Same thing with substance abuse. That's not a reason to remove the children just because there's an addiction issue. So those are common when we leave the children.
Well, not only that, but with substance abuse, it's not just the simple fact that the parent is abusing drugs. We actually have to show evidence of harm, because we'll hear it all the time. Well, that person over there, they're such a druggie and this and that. Well, how do you know? Well, so-and-so told me. Well, I'm sorry, that's not enough. We have to go to the court with evidence. We need and it's hard sometimes to show that. And we may feel ourselves, well, we probably think that person is using drugs. But you have to show how it affects the children. Are they hungry? Is all the money being spent? Are they being evicted multiple times? Not getting the child appropriate care or medical coverage.
Or not
because-
even maybe watching the child.
Right.
Correct.
because-
Inadequate
Making it-
supervision is a big one.
And when we don't have that level of proof, that's more likely when we're going to leave the family together and give them the option to have voluntary protective services.
So people that come in. I want to jump real quick and talking a little bit about the Guardian Ad Litem program, and then come back to some of the other things that, some of the other program or some of the other services rather for parents and children. But tell us a little bit about what the program is.
We're a program that we train volunteers to come in to advocate for the best interest of the child. That's our only purpose. And the volunteer gets to know the child. We're actually appointed by the court when the child, most of the cases we get are when the child has been removed, when the court says the child is not safe at home. At that point, the court appoints our program. And then we ask a particular volunteer to take the case. And that volunteer gets to know the child, every aspect of their life, including school and their medical records, everything. They visit the child at least once a month so that they can bond with them and get to know what their issues are, and we make sure that the services that they're entitled to that they get, or that they need, that they get. And we're with them throughout the court case, and whether they go through adoption or whether there's a reunification, the guardian is there with them. We're the one person in the court that's not getting paid, basically, and we're only there to look out for the best interest of the child.
So are you, in some ways, the voice of the child in that?
We are somewhat the voice of the child, but we're also, we do tell the court what the child wants, but we're advocating for their best interest, which
Right,
may not
isn't always-
necessarily, yeah,
I
may not
understand that.
necessarily be what they want. Most frequently, children want to go home. They want to be with their parents. And so sometimes the guardian will definitely tell the court that's what the child wants. But we want to make sure that it's safe for them. And guardians are very protective of they call them their kids.
Well, and I kind of like have always thought of it, whereas you're coming in and you're looking at every aspect. So
Yes.
you're looking at one, the foster parents
right.
and that relationship, and is that a good match?
Right.
You're looking at even the caseworker
Yes.
maybe in that person, and then so you're looking at all of these
All
pieces,
aspects,
and you
yes.
really hopefully don't have any agenda there other than just what's best for them.
Yes.
So that's I think what I meant by the voice of the child.
Yes, yes. Yes, I always say we're the purest voice in the court. We're also, people that come in with common sense. We don't have the statutes in front of us or the policy notebooks. We're there just to see, make sure the child is taken care of as if they're our own child. So yes, we're looking at every aspect and trying to do the best we can for the child.
Now, how did you become a guardian ad litem?
Well, I've always loved children, and I actually a friend of mine was telling me about the program, and I said, I have 8 godchildren, no children of my own, and they're all in wonderful, intact families. And I said to myself, I'm at a point in life where I want to be the auntie to a child who needs me. So I became a guardian. And my first child, I said to myself, I don't know if I can take a teenager, I'm not sure. But I felt such concern for our kids that are aging out that was the first case that I got was a teenager. And she's now aged out, and I'm still in touch with her and in her life. And very shortly, I'm so passionate about the program that I ended up getting hired to recruit volunteers. I love people and I love the program, so I do both. I always have cases, and I also recruit and train volunteers.
And what kind of requirements does somebody have to have in order to be a guardian ad litem?
Yes, it used to be 21 years of age, but now we've lowered it to 19. You have to go through a screening process, application process, a 30-hour training, and a level 2 background check. And I would say the characteristics that make a great guardian is a heart for the child, someone who is flexible through this crazy maze of child welfare, someone who has a kind heart, someone who's assertive and never takes no for an answer. But people come from all walks of life. Teachers make great guardians, nurses, business people with a heart for kids, basically.
And that kind of can segue back into what we were talking about as far as in the process of once they're out of the system, because as they're assigned a guardian ad litem, as they're reported, they're given services, and I'm guessing that you make sure that some of those services are done.
And sometimes we recommend services too.
Tell us a little bit about the different services for both parents, and I know that it probably I know it depends on what it is that the situation is that they're taken out of, but tell us a little bit about some of the services that are provided to both the parents and the children.
There's just so many. We have mental health counseling, there's substance abuse counseling, batteries intervention, domestic violence counseling, there's support groups, it's...
And who determines, is it a caseworker that determines what this child needs?
It's actually
We
a
do,
specialist.
but we also engage the family, and we're moving to a new methodology right now. It's really about engaging the family and trying getting the family, because they're going to buy into it then and want to be doing it versus us trying to tell them what they have to do. And what we're doing right now is listening to the family and saying, tell me about your history. Tell me about your background. How can I best help you? And understand where they came from to be able to provide an effective service.
Right.
And to help stop the reoccurrence of abuse for a particular family.
The families really are the expert on themselves, obviously, and so is their support system. Their, parents or relatives that are around, their neighbors even, are their support systems, and they see their strengths and weaknesses also. So when the family has, we do family team conferences, and so when they come together and they all talk, they can talk about, why the department became involved, why did that happen, and what would change that. And through these discussions, they identify the services that will help them and grow their family back together.
Now, do you find that there's a huge success in when you take a child out of the home, once they're reunited, that they stay and that there's no longer the abuse that happens? Or do you find that it's more of a cycle that it continues to reoccur?
I think that really depends because most of our families are successful. The reabuse rate it's not, it's about 16 to 20%, which is not where we want to be. But I think it's a certain group of families as well, kind of, the dynamics there. But that's not the majority of our families.
No, most that are reunified, we've built that support system around them and they've learned so much that they stay together and they stay out of the system afterwards.
And we've seen beautiful partnerships between foster parents and biological families and
I think that
blossom
keeps
out of
them
and
strong.
it's a huge benefit. And foster families still helping families even after a case has been closed, and even guardian ad litem
Guardians
as well.
stay involved.
Stay involved.
Right, and that just helps.
It's the support system. If they don't have one locally, a lot of times abuse and neglect occurs because they don't have the support system around them. If I lose my job and I end up with an addiction, my parents are close enough to where they're going to step in and help. But if they're not there, that's when the system comes in. And they would, so this makeshift support system that we build around them really maintains them.
I think that's a good point because I think the people that get caught up in the system are people that don't have anyone. The kids that end up in foster care is because there is no one in their community that's going to take them in. So if you do have a guardian that becomes involved, a lot of our guardians are grandparent age, they're retirement age. So sometimes they become like a surrogate parent to some of these parents, and that gives that extra support that they need and role models.
So many of the parents that we're involved with end up looking to the case manager, the guardian ad litem, the foster parent, many different people as kind of just a new support and role model, like you said.
What is the role of the sheriff's department when it comes to abuse being reported? Is there always a case that's opened, or what is the?
Anytime DCF goes out to the house, they telephone the sheriff's office and we respond together. And our main goal is the best interest of the child. Sometimes the abuse is, sometimes we need to make an arrest right there. Otherwise, a deputy would write up the report, it would come up to criminal investigations, and it would get assigned to a detective. Sometimes a uniformed officer can't do the same as what I could do in regular clothes. Sometimes they need specialized interviews with a forensic interviewer, things like that I could do that a deputy on scene, at 8 o'clock at night or, 7 o'clock in the morning can't do.
Now, if there is evidence of child abuse, what type of punishment is there? I mean, for when they get arrested, what's the punishment?
Well, child abuse is a felony. Aggravated child abuse is a first-degree felony. So obviously, when you get arrested, you have to go to court. Sometimes you get probation, sometimes you go to jail, sometimes you go to prison.
And how long if you're going to prison for child abuse, would that be in a situation, give me an example of how long somebody might?
You could get probation, or you could get up to 5 years for child abuse. Aggravated child abuse, you could get...
And what's the difference between child abuse and aggravated child abuse?
It's aggravated would be like a willful, malicious intent, permanent injury. If you break your child's arm, what doesn't work right, doesn't heal right, things like that. There's caging children, handcuffing children, putting them in dog cages. things like that.
No, there's even death, and you can end up with a more serious
Yeah.
charge like homicide.
Like
And-
aggravated battery would be if you shake your baby, and now your baby has brain damage, things like that.
When you're looking at abusive situations and you've taken kids out of the homes, is there a point where, if they've been removed from the home so many times, like is it a 3 strikes you're out, or is there a number, where you finally say this just isn't working?
It's not really a number, but when there's no progress, we do have a time limit. We want these children to be in permanent situations very quickly. And if the parents really aren't making moves towards that, we will go towards termination of parental rights. And most likely they're with a relative, and then that relative could adopt or become the permanent guardian.
Sometimes guardians get involved in termination, and
That's
requesting termination of parental rights, or at least our program, because our eye is also on how quickly can we get the children into a permanent situation. It's one
Well,
of
because
the-
you hate to see a child go from foster home, back to foster home, and so on and so forth.
sometimes they move around quite a bit.
Yes.
We always have to look at the circumstance of why they're coming out again. Is it the same maltreatment that occurred originally? Is it a new problem? Is this one based on, poverty issues? So it's very fact-driven. It really depends on the situation. And I know we've heard some of the stories. Sometimes people are like, well, they've had all this stuff going on. Well, you have to understand each situation is very unique, and we always have to look at what's best for the child.
Right.
Because even though, maybe they were removed at 5 years old, now they're 10 or 15, it may be a different circumstance for that child.
So every one is different and unique to that person, which you're grateful for, because there's no way to just write a
Right.
rule that's going to go across.
No formula.
Not at all.
No. If somebody is needing more information or wanting more information, we're running out of time at this point. Where should they go to get more information? One, as to how to be a guardian ad litem, and then also on the foster care
I would recommend that they visit www.kidscentralinc.org.
Very good.
And our website is www.guardianadlitem.org. And also, I'm the recruiter for the Fifth Circuit, and my number is 352-274-5231. And I'd love to talk to anyone who'd be interested in becoming a guardian.
Well, and I thank you all for what you do for our children and being advocates for them and their safety.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
so
being here
much.
today.
Thank you.